Salve to Discipuli, this is the Easter Buddy and the stage 36 lesson where we get some more tenses in the subjunctive. Quick review, we have 5 different categories for our verbs: person, number, tense, voice, and mood. We've got first, second, and third person, singular and plural for number. Tenses, we have 5 tenses now: present, imperfect, perfect, pluperfect, and future, active and passive voice, indicative, imperative, and subjunctive mood. Much of what we're going to do in this lesson is compare the indicative with the subjunctive. Quick review. We've learned the imperfect and the pluperfect active subjunctive. The imperfect was just taking the infinitive of the verb and adding our personal endings, mst, mustis, nt. The pluperfect was taking the third principal part, adding issa, and then our personal endings. The imperfect passive subjunctive is very similar. You're going to take our regular infinitive, and instead of adding your active personal endings, you're going to add your passive personal endings. So the imperfect passive subjunctive is quite easy. It's formed the exact same way, but instead of taking the infinitive and adding your active personal endings, you add your passive personal endings. The present is a little bit more tricky. So here we have the present active indicative. This is the form of the verb that should be most familiar. We've had it for the longest. And then we have the present passive indicative. So you can see that we have our thematic vowel A, because this is a first conjugation verb. What happens when you transfer it over from the indicative to the subjunctive is that you change your thematic vowel. So now we have an E as our thematic vowel. So after we change our thematic vowel to E, we simply add our active personal endings and our passive personal endings. So the only thing that looks different from the indicative to the subjunctive is the thematic vowel has changed. The first conjugation will go from an A to an E. Second conjugation will go from an E to an EA. So again, we've got our active indicative, what we've known for a long time. We've got our passive indicative. And then the subjunctive, same active endings, just with a different thematic vowel. Here it's a combination of vowels. For the third conjugation, it's a little bit trickier to recognize the thematic vowel. Most often you have an I, sometimes it's an E, but in the subjunctive it's always going to be an A. So if you see a verb that has an A as its thematic vowel, and it looks like it normally should have something else, you're probably looking at the subjunctive. Third I-O, same thing, except for you've got an I in front of the A. And our fourth conjugation, we pretty much always have an I for our thematic vowel in the indicative. We have an IA for our thematic vowel in the subjunctive. And then we have our irregular verb to be. Sum essest, sumus essist sunt, sim sis sit, simis sitis sint. All right, let's do some practice. Copy down these sentences, bracket your dependent clause, underline any modifiers and draw arrows to their antecedents, put parentheses around prep phrases, mark as many of the words as you can, and translate the sentence. Okay, here we go. So a hike is a modifier. It's modifying werba because they are both neuter plural. Ne to our subjunctive is a dependent clause. We've got an accusative direct object. Plausimus is our verb. There's no nominative here, but we know that we's the subject because of the mus. Imperator is nominative subject, and then this is a passive verb. So we applauded these words lest the emperor be offended. All right, we've got a prep phrase here. We've got ut and a subjunctive, so it's a dependent clause. Stetis are verb. There's no nominative, but we know from this ending that the subject is I. Animad vertere is our passive verb. Also no nominative, but we know from this R ending here that I is the verb, subject. So I stood near the arch in order to be noticed. All right, so we've got an ut and a subjunctive. There's our dependent clause. We've got a nominative subject. We've got a verb. We've got a nominative subject and a passive verb. Domitian ordered that his wife be exiled. All right, we've got nostri modifying amici. We've got a question word and a subjunctive. So that's our dependent clause. It's an indirect question. Amici, nominative subject, verb, question word. Verb, passive verb. No nominative in here, but because of this more ending, we know that the subject is we. So our friends did not know why we were being punished. Okay, we've got ut and a subjunctive, so there's our dependent clause. Domum is a prep phrase. It doesn't have a preposition, but it is showing a prep phrase. Direct object, accusative direct object, an adverb. This is an intensifier. Here's our verb. No nominative in our main clause, but because of the ESD, we know that the subject is you. And we've got a passive verb here, again, no nominative, but because of the aorist, we know that the subject is you. So, you annoyed the speaker so much that he sent you home. Oh, sorry, that you were sent home. That is passive. All right, discipuli. Remember, the imperfect passive subjunctive is formed the same way as the active, just with passive personal endings. The present active and passive subjunctives have thematic vowel changes depending on their conjugation. So that's the only way you're going to know that you're looking at a subjunctive. The first goes from an A to an E, the second from an E to an EA, the third goes from an I or E to an A, the third goes to an IA, and the fourth goes to an IA. So E, EA, A, IA, IA. You just got to memorize those. Vale to discipuli.